So let's bring in Peter Baker, MSNBC political analyst and chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, and Alex Wagner, adjunct law professor at Syracuse University and former chief of staff to the Secretary of the Army during the Obama administration, also author of this new article for DefenseOne.com, Heads Must Roll for Signal Chat Debacle. Guys, welcome to both of you. So, Peter, in the last 24 hours, the Trump administration has been dealt some back-to-back legal blows by federal judges. How is the White House reacting to these decisions?
Well, of course, they react with aggression, right? They attack anytime anybody rules against them. They use that as evidence that somehow the judges are against them or political. In fact, rather than look at whether or not maybe their actions were the problem and the judge are simply calling them on it. This is part of the reason why you see them so intent on attacking these law firms, right? If the courts are the main power of accountability in this era, when Congress has basically become a pocket parliament for the president, and agencies and the Justice Department and the FBI have been made into partisan or political instruments, then you need, in Trump's view, to neutralize the ability to go to court and to stop him from doing his agenda. How do you do that? By taking law firms off the table, by making it impossible for plaintiffs, potential plaintiffs, to find lawyers, or at least high-quality lawyers, or the top-quality lawyers, because those lawyers are afraid of angering the president of the United States. It's all part of a larger pattern that this president has indicated in 10 weeks in which he's trying to shut down alternate or competing centers of power in Washington.
It is absolutely stunning. It sounds positively un-American. But let's move on to the Wall Street Journal report, Peter, which is that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth allowed his wife to sit in on sensitive meetings. And as we show this video, you can see her right there. She is in the background in the pale blue there in the discussions. What have you heard about this?
Yeah, I mean, look, cabinet secretaries have often brought spouses on foreign trips with them, but usually in a sort of a diplomatic kind of role, in the kind of role where they show up for a dinner or for a, for a photo op or what have you. They don't usually sit in on the actual business meetings, certainly ones with sensitive topics like war in Europe. That's very unusual. And I think that that's something that obviously has caused consternation at the Defense Department, where they take things like this seriously. They have protocols for secrecy, and Alex obviously can talk about that better than I can. But I think that this is a thing that obviously has offended some people who are in charge of protecting the nation's secrets, because they don't see it as, in concert with the rules and the protocols and the traditions that the country has established over many, many years.
Yeah, well, as Pete has suggested, let's go to you, Alex, because according to this report, these two meetings were with foreign military counterparts. So, Alex, what level of classification would they fall under? And describe how unusual it is for an official spouse who has no security clearances, as far as we know, to be allowed into these rooms.
Alex, these meetings are often somewhat sensitive, and so a spouse typically wouldn't be invited. It's not unusual to bring a spouse to a foreign military installation, for example, to meet with the spouses of service members. In fact, that is a great touch point to hear some of their concerns and their challenges, and then bring those back to the Secretary of Defense so he can make policy to address their very real concerns. I also heard he brought his brother on this foreign trip. And to me, all the talk about a meritocracy seems to be really infused with nepotism these days. So that's a head scratcher as well, on top of the bringing Mrs. Hegseth on travel.
Let's move to the Signal app controversy. Alex, given your experience, what is your reaction to not only a journalist being on a small group discussing military operations, but also Signal being this method of communication?
I think it's highly, highly unusual. In fact, it's probably unprecedented. As I understand, the chain itself linking the topic of a principals committee meeting, which are often held in the Situation Room in the basement of the West Wing of the White House, with the topic of the meeting, calling it a principals committee meeting, and the topic itself is classified. So the entire chain, at least from my experience in the Obama administration and then in the Biden administration, would have been classified the moment it was started. That said, I think we just have to breathe a sigh of relief that none of our Navy pilots were shot out of the sky as a result of this. That's the first thing. The second thing, and it concerns me as the former chief people officer of the Air Force and the Space Force, principally, that the same standard that junior enlisted, mid-level officers, or even the top brass would be held to is not relevant here. I can't imagine anybody else who texted this type of information on an unclassified app that we know our adversaries have access to personal cell phones of senior officials, and that's why we ban this kind of thing. Every other person in the military would be court-martialed and kicked out.
Wow. So you have, Peter, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. He has taken responsibility for this incident, but the group included Defense Secretary Hegseth, Director of National Intelligence Gabbard, other top members of the administration. Then in the immediate aftermath, Trump defended the group and tried to deflect blame onto the journalist. So where do things stand now? Have Waltz or Hegseth been weakened in Trump's eyes by this?
Well, I think so. I mean, the question is whether he does anything about it, and that's a different question. But no question that that Waltz and Hegseth are on the bubble here. No question that they're under fire from their own Republicans. In fact, maybe more in private than in public, but they have not helped themselves. And the question is whether or not Trump chooses to do anything. He is so far dug in. He is basically saying he's not going to take action against them. Certainly Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, made clear the other day she doesn't seem likely to start any kind of investigation. Certainly, as Alex just said, any other situation like this you would think would prompt at least an investigation, even if not necessarily charges. Just to look at what the facts are and see what the situation is and make an evaluation as to whether charges might be appropriate. Here, that doesn't seem to be happening. Now, it is possible that the president eventually decides he wants to get rid of one or both. Each of them has their own problems aside from this with the president. Waltz is not a favorite of the MAGA crowd. There's been talk about him already behind the scenes even before this. But at the same time, I think that Trump, more than anybody, likes to resist what he considers to be the chattering class. He doesn't like to act under pressure from Washington writ large. And if he can avoid it, he probably will. But but leave these guys on the hook, and that means that if they get in trouble again, even if they survive this time, there's less patience for it.
Yeah. And look, Alex, sure, mistakes happen, but could something like this have happened during your time in the Obama administration? I'm curious, how strictly was the adherence to secure protocols then? And big picture, what does it suggest to you, this whole incident, about how things have changed in this administration?
Alex, from the bottom to the top, everyone who's ever served in the Department of Defense, civilian and military, has to take these basic cyber hygiene trainings every year. They're annoying, they're not fun, but we've all got to do them to prevent exactly the type of action that just happened. As for what it means, I wonder, I scratch my head, could they really be either so inexperienced or so lazy to subvert the basic precautions that are required when America puts its troops in harm's way? And that, to me, when you pull whether or not there was a journalist on the thread or not, whether it's classified material or not, at the end of the day, this type of information getting into the wrong hands threatens and imperils Americans' lives. And that is a really serious thing. And we have to take some action going forward to assure our men and women in uniform that the senior leaders are not being cavalier with their safety.
Peter, you write, what constitutes an official secret in this new era in Washington, it turns out, seems to depend on who is asking and who is telling. How do you explain, Peter, the variety of the explanations, the excuses from the various administration members this week? Is it a messaging issue or is it more than that?
Well, it's an attitude issue, right? It's a perception issue, and it's a policy issue. What you consider to be a secret. This is the same week that that the administration went to court and said that it will not tell a federal judge what time a plane of migrants landed in El Salvador, what time it took off, and what time it left U.S. airspace, because that's too sensitive. They invoke what is called the state secrets privilege. Too sensitive to tell a judge information about a plane that has already landed. And by the way, whose landing was captured on video and posted online by the president of El Salvador. Hardly a secret. But they're saying it's too secret. At the same time, they're saying that information about an upcoming military strike, including the specific times that the warplanes would be hitting the targets, is somehow not classified. somehow not a problem to have out there on an unsecured commercial group chat text-like signal. And I think that disparity happening in the exact same week is very telling, because what it tells you is, of course, it's situational. When it's in Trump's interest to hide information from a federal judge because he's worried that it might look like he did something wrong, in other words, violated the judge's order to turn that plane around, then it's too secret to talk about. When they put out the secret on an unsecured group chat that happens to also include a journalist, then that's not a secret. That's not a problem. It's just this journalist's fault for being added, even though he didn't do the adding.
I don't know. A lot of this flies in the face of basic logic, but that's just me. Peter and Alex, good to see you both. Thank you so much.